Life Audio.
Hello. Thank you for listening to Your Daily Bible Verse, the podcast that examines one verse each day to learn more about God and His will for our lives. I'm your host, Kyle Norman. After a brief message from one of our sponsors, we will listen to today's verse. Today's verse can be found in Mark chapter 4, verse 37 and 38. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him up and said, "Teacher, do you not care if we perish?" I have always loved storms. I love the howling wind and the sometimes deafening sound of the rain. I love to sit and watch lightning as surges of electricity stretch across the sky. There's a story of Nikola Tesla, the famous scientist, who is noted to run out of his house immediately following any storm so that he could applaud the creator for this majestic show. Storms, I think, can be wonderful. They can be inspiring and awesome, beautiful even. Well, if you view them from the safety of a porch. When you're inside, all safe and warm, well, storms are great. But when you're caught in the middle of the storm, well, that's a whole other matter, isn't it? Whether you're walking along a roadway or driving somewhere in your car with windshield wipers unable to keep up with the rain, or if, like the disciples, you're in a boat stuck in the middle of a lake, well, then storms don't seem all that wonderful. In fact, they can feel scary and threatening. That's what the disciples experience. The situation is quite simple. Jesus had been teaching on the side of Lake Gennesaret for hours. And as night approached, Jesus invited the disciples to journey with him to the other side of the lake. So they leave the crowd and they sail across the lake. Jesus, obviously tired from a day of teaching and healing, sits in the stern of the boat and falls asleep. And none of this would have been a problem, except for the storm. Storm immediately erupts around them. And we can't downplay the drama of the scene. This wasn't a minor skirmish. This wasn't gentle wind and light waves. No, this was an immense and almost violent storm. Waves crashed over the side of the boat. The disciples would have been struggling just to keep the boat in any semblance of steady. And through it all, there was Jesus sleeping. Now, before we move on, let me ask you, have you ever gone through a storm in your life? Have you ever gone through something where the calm, serene journey that you thought was before you suddenly became anything but? Sometimes it's a diagnosis, sometimes it's a job loss, sometimes it's a relational breakdown or something else. But we find ourselves struggling just to exist in that moment. And all of our energy, all of our resolve, and all of our faith is spent just trying to not be swallowed up by whatever it is that faces down upon us. You know, when something like that happens, as people of faith, we might believe that we've done something to anger God, as if what we are going through is a result of some unconfessed sin in our lives. Either God has caused the storm as some punishment upon us, or God abandons us to the storm because of sin. Either way, we are left with this hollow feeling that we are alone in whatever we face. I'm sure this is what the disciples felt. So they wake Jesus and they say, "Jesus, don't you care that we are perishing?" And in their question, there are echoes of sadness and exhaustion and maybe a little bit of anger. Don't you care what we are facing? Don't you care about us? Have you ever echoed those statements? I'm sure in some way we all have. It's natural to question where Christ's power is when the storms of life erupt around us. It's natural to even charge Jesus with falling asleep on the job. And so if you've ever found yourselves thinking these thoughts, don't condemn yourself. You are just doing what disciples do from time to time. But that being said, here's the interesting thing about this account. Jesus is asleep not because he is unconcerned about the disciples, but because he is unconcerned about the storm. Jesus is in the boat. That means that there is no wind that is strong enough to blow the disciples off course. There is no wave big enough that will drown out the Lord's presence. And so what the disciples perceive as rejection is actually steadfast resilience. And we know the rest of the story. Jesus calms the wind and the waves by a single command. He proves that we can trust his presence with any storm that we experience. It's a poignant image for us that while Jesus does not stop the storm from coming, he does remain with the disciples in the middle of it. Jesus is in the storm-riddled boat just with the disciples. And that's the point. He quiets the waves, not to prove that he can make the storm go away, but to show that we can trust his presence when the storm seems to remain. Amid the storms of life, we have a choice to make as to what we focus on. We can focus on the wind and the waves and the furious squall that erupts around us, or we can focus on Jesus, who is in the boat with us, who dwells with us through whatever life might throw our way. And that truth can be trusted even if we can't see where he is or see what he is doing, because he is in the boat with us. And it means that despite how furious the storm might seem, we have everything we need.